A stormy encounter. The rain had started hours earlier, an unrelenting downpour that drenched the small town of Ridgely. A storm like this wasn't uncommon for late spring, but it turned the winding roads outside town into a treacherous maze of slick asphalt and swirling water. In the distance, the faint glow of streetlights barely pierced the gray haze, making visibility a challenge. Jamal Carter, a seasoned mechanic with hands hardened by years of labor, was driving home from his garage. The old pickup truck groaned beneath him, its engine humming in a way that only reassured him because he'd rebuilt it himself. His day had been long, an endless cycle of oil changes, brake jobs, and troubleshooting. But he didn't mind. Fixing things had always been his solace, a way to find order in the chaos of the world. The rhythmic squeak of his windshield wipers filled the cabin as Jamal squinted through the rain. The roads outside Ridgely were poorly lit and bordered by dense woods, giving them an eerie, isolated feel. He had driven this route countless times, but tonight the storm made it feel different, heavier, almost foreboding. As he rounded a bend, his headlights caught something unusual: the faint, pulsing glow of hazard lights. Jamal eased his foot off the gas, his truck slowing to a crawl. On the shoulder of the road sat a sleek black sedan, its hood popped open. Standing beside it, partially illuminated by the truck's headlights, was a figure huddled against the rain. Jamal pulled over a few yards ahead of the car and turned on his hazards. His first instinct was caution. He'd heard stories about roadside setups, people pretending to need help only to ambush good Samaritans. But as he watched the figure, small and shivering in a thin coat, he dismissed the thought. Whoever it was didn't seem like a threat, just someone in need. Grabbing his flashlight and a weathered rain jacket from behind the seat, Jamal stepped out into the storm. The rain was colder than he'd expected, soaking through his jeans almost immediately. He jogged toward the sedan, shining his flashlight ahead to get a better look. "Need some help?" he called out, raising his voice to be heard over the storm. The figure turned, a woman, her face pale, and her dark hair plastered to her cheeks by the rain. She nodded, hugging herself tightly. "The car it won't start. I think it's the battery." Jamal nodded, already mentally running through the checklist of possibilities. "Pop the hood for me. Let me take a look." She gestured toward the open hood, her hands trembling slightly. "It's already open. I thank you. I didn't know what else to do." "No problem," Jamal said, offering a small smile before crouching down to inspect the engine. His flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a pristine engine bay. It was almost too clean, something he only saw in high-end vehicles. This wasn't just any car. It was a top-tier luxury sedan. "Battery's dead," he said after a quick assessment. "Nothing to worry about. I've got jumper cables in my truck." The woman exhaled sharply, relief washing over her features. "Thank you. I didn't know who else to call. And there's no signal out here." "It happens," Jamal said. "Stay in the car, out of the rain. I'll get you fixed up." She hesitated, then nodded, retreating to the driver's seat. Jamal jogged back to his truck, his boots splashing in the growing puddles along the road. The cables were behind his seat, coiled and ready as always. He'd lost count of how many times he used them over the years, not just for himself, but for neighbors, stranded motorists, and even the occasional stranger. It was just part of who he was. A fixer, someone who helped. Within minutes, Jamal had the sedan's engine humming back to life. The woman stepped out of the car, her expression a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. "You're a lifesaver," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't even know how to thank you." "No need," Jamal replied, brushing off her thanks. "Just pay it forward one day." She stared at him for a moment, as if trying to memorize his face. "What's your name?" "Jamal Carter," he said simply, offering his hand. She took it, her grip surprisingly firm despite the cold. "I'm Olivia," she said. "Olivia Harcourt." "Thank you, Mr. Carter." "Really?" Jamal shrugged. It's no big deal. Drive safe, all right. She hesitated, as if she wanted to say more, but finally nodded. I will. As her car disappeared down the road, Jamal stood there for a moment, letting the rain soak through his jacket. It wasn't the first time he'd helped someone like this, and he figured it wouldn't be the last. Still, something about Olivia lingered in his mind as he climbed back into his truck and headed home. By the time he reached his small house on the edge of town, the rain had slowed to a drizzle. Jamal peeled off his wet clothes, tossed them into the laundry, and sank onto the couch. He tried to shake off the encounter, but the memory of Olivia's grateful expression and the strange feeling in his chest refused to fade. Little did he know, his act of kindness had set something in motion, something that would change his life forever. Unexpected guests. Saturday morning arrived with an unusual brightness that followed the previous night's relentless storm. Jamal Carter sat at the small wooden table in his kitchen, sipping on a steaming mug of coffee. The sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the room. His house was modest but comfortable, a reflection of the man who called it home. The faded wallpaper, the well-worn couch in the living room, and the faint smell of motor oil clinging to his clothes all spoke of a life spent working hard and appreciating the simple things. He had no grand plans for the day, just a few errands to run and some tinkering to do in his garage. The storm had left the town soaked, but the air now carried a fresh, clean scent that Jamal found oddly invigorating. He stared out the window, watching a bird flutter from one branch to another in his small backyard, the world seemingly at peace. The ringing of his phone jolted him from his thoughts. He reached for it, expecting a call from one of his regulars at the garage or maybe his neighbor, Mrs. Bennett, who often needed help with her aging sedan. Instead, it was an unfamiliar number. "Hello," Jamal answered, his tone wary but polite. "Jamal, you need to get home right now." It was his neighbor, Calvin, speaking in a hurried and excited voice. Jamal frowned. "I am home, Calvin. What's going on?" "You won't believe this," Calvin continued. "There are 2 Rolls Royces parked in front of your house. I'm not kidding. Man, 2 of them, black and shiny like they just rolled out of a showroom." Jamal's brow furrowed as he walked toward the front window, peeking through the curtains. Sure enough, 2 immaculate black Rolls Royces were parked on the street outside his house. Their gleaming exteriors reflected the sunlight like mirrors, and even from this distance, Jamal could see their polished chrome grills and the Spirit of Ecstasy emblems atop their hoods. "What the?" Jamal muttered, his voice trailing off. Calvin's voice came through the phone again. "There's some guys in suits standing out there too. They look like they're waiting for you. You're not in trouble, are you?" Jamal sighed, his mind racing. "I don't know, Calvin. Let me go see what's going on. I'll call you back." Ending the call, Jamal grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The morning air was crisp, the streets still damp from the storm. He approached the cars cautiously, his boots crunching on the gravel driveway. As he neared, one of the suited men, a tall, clean-cut figure with sharp features and an air of professionalism, stepped forward. "Mr. Carter," the man said, extending a hand. Jamal nodded slowly, shaking the man's hand. "That's me. Can I help you?" The man offered a polite smile. "My name is Mr. Whittaker. I'm here on behalf of Miss Olivia Harcourt. She's asked us to escort you to her residence. If you're willing, of course." Jamal blinked, momentarily stunned. "Olivia Harcourt, the woman I helped the other night." "Precisely," Mr. Whittaker replied. "Miss Harcourt was deeply appreciative of your assistance and would like to express her gratitude in person." Jamal hesitated, glancing between the 2 luxury cars and the stoic faces of the men in suits. The entire situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Why would someone go to such lengths just to thank him? "Listen, Mr. Whittaker," Jamal said, scratching the back of his neck. "I appreciate the gesture, but this seems a little excessive. I was just doing what anyone else would have done." Mr. Whittaker's smile didn't falter. Miss Harcourt disagrees. She believes your kindness deserves more than simple thanks. If you'd allow us, we'd like to take you to her estate. It's about an hour's drive from here. Jamal glanced back at his house, the sense of normalcy it represented suddenly feeling far away. He thought about refusing. This whole thing seemed too strange, too much. But a part of him was curious. The way Olivia had looked at him that night, the gratitude in her eyes, had lingered with him ever since. Maybe this was worth exploring, if only to satisfy his own curiosity. "All right," Jamal said finally. "I'll go. Let me grab my keys." "No need," Mr. Whittaker said, gesturing toward one of the Rolls Royces. "We'll drive you." Jamal hesitated for only a moment before stepping toward the car. The driver opened the rear door, and Jamal slid into the plush leather seat. The interior smelled of fine leather and polished wood, a far cry from the well-worn confines of his pickup truck. The engine purred softly as the car pulled away, its movement so smooth it felt like gliding. The town of Ridgely quickly disappeared behind them, replaced by open countryside and winding roads. Jamal stared out the tinted windows, his mind racing with questions. Who was Olivia Harcourt, really, and why had she gone to such lengths to thank him? After nearly an hour, the car turned onto a long, private driveway lined with towering oak trees. Jamal's jaw dropped as the estate came into view. It was massive, a sprawling mansion that looked more like a castle, with manicured gardens, fountains, and grand stone archways. The Rolls Royce rolled to a stop in front of the entrance, and Jamal stepped out, feeling completely out of place in his work boots and denim jacket. A butler greeted him at the door and escorted him inside, where Jamal was immediately struck by the opulence. The floors were marble, the walls adorned with expensive artwork, and the chandeliers above sparkled like constellations. He followed the butler down a hallway and into his sitting room, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. Standing by the window, dressed in an elegant yet understated outfit, was Olivia Harcourt. She turned as Jamal entered, a warm smile spreading across her face. "Jamal," she said, stepping forward, "I'm so glad you came." Jamal cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how out of place he felt. "Miss Harcourt, this is quite the place you've got here." She laughed lightly, motioning for him to sit. "Please call me Olivia. And yes, it's a bit overwhelming, isn't it? But today isn't about my house. It's about you." Jamal frowned as he took a seat, still unsure of what to expect. "I don't really understand what's going on here. I just helped you out with your car. It wasn't a big deal." Olivia's smile softened. "To you, it might not have been. But to me, it meant everything. That night, I was vulnerable, scared, and completely unprepared for what had happened. You stopped when you didn't have to. You helped me without expecting anything in return. That kind of kindness is rare." Jamal shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just did what anyone would have done." "Not anyone," Olivia said firmly. "And that's why I wanted to thank you properly. You gave me something that night, Jamal. Your time, your kindness. Now I want to give something back to you." She gestured toward a nearby table, where a sleek leather folder and a small ornate box sat waiting. "But first," she said, her eyes glinting with purpose, "let me explain why you're really here." Jamal leaned forward, his heart pounding. Whatever Olivia had planned, he knew his life was about to change forever. The proposal. Jamal Carter sat in the opulent sitting room of Olivia Harcourt's mansion, still trying to process the whirlwind of events that had brought him here. The leather folder on the table, alongside the small, intricately designed box, seemed to radiate significance. Olivia Harcourt, the same woman he had helped on a rainy night just 2 days ago, sat across from him, her expression poised but warm. "I'm sure this all feels overwhelming," Olivia said, her voice calm yet inviting. "But I wanted to bring you here because what you did for me wasn't just an act of kindness. It reminded me of something I've been missing in my life." Jamal, still unsure of how to respond, leaned back slightly. "Look, Olivia, I appreciate whatever this is, but I'm just a mechanic. I help people because that's what you're supposed to do, not because I expect anything in return." "And that's precisely why you're here," Olivia replied, her gaze steady. "You don't expect anything. You don't take anything for granted. People like you, honest, hardworking, selfless, are rare. And that's why I want to make you an offer." Jamal raised an eyebrow, glancing between her and the table. "An offer?" Olivia nodded and leaned forward, opening the leather folder. Inside, Jamal saw several sheets of neatly typed paper, but what caught his eye was the bold number at the top of one of the pages. His jaw tightened as he processed the amount. It was more money than he had ever seen, more than he thought he'd see in a lifetime. "This," Olivia began, gesturing to the folder, "is a check for $250,000. Consider it a gift, not a loan, to give you the freedom to pursue your dreams." Jamal blinked, struggling to find his voice. "A gift? For what? I didn't do anything to deserve this." "You did," Olivia insisted gently. "You stopped for a stranger when most people wouldn't. You took time out of your day to help someone in need. That may not seem extraordinary to you, but in my world, where people often only look out for themselves, it's more than extraordinary. It's invaluable." Jamal stared at the check, his heart pounding. The temptation was immediate and undeniable. That money could change everything. He could finally open his own garage, buy the tools he needed, and maybe even give back to his community the way he'd always wanted. But it also felt too good to be true. "What's the catch?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Nobody just hands over this kind of money without expecting something in return." Olivia smiled, as if she had anticipated the question. "There's no catch, Jamal. No strings attached. But there is something else I'd like to offer you." She reached for the ornate box and opened it, revealing a set of gleaming keys. "These are for a new truck parked outside. It's fully equipped, reliable, and ready for whatever you need." Jamal's eyes widened. A new truck. He couldn't even imagine driving something that wasn't held together by duct tape and sheer willpower. "And," Olivia continued, her tone becoming more serious, "I want to offer you a job. A position here at my estate, managing my family's vehicle collection." "Vehicle collection?" Jamal asked, frowning in confusion. Olivia nodded, her eyes lighting up with enthusiasm. "My late father was a car enthusiast. He collected dozens of classic and rare cars over the years, but after his passing, the collection has fallen into disrepair. I want to restore it, but I need someone I can trust. Someone who knows cars inside and out, someone with integrity. I think you're the perfect person for the job." Jamal sat back, trying to process the flood of information. This wasn't just an offer, it was a lifeline. But it also felt overwhelming. He'd spent his whole life in the small town of Ridgely, working in a garage and living paycheck to paycheck. The idea of leaving that behind, of stepping into a world so far removed from everything he knew, was terrifying. "Why me?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. "There are plenty of people out there more qualified than I am. Why not hire one of them?" Olivia's expression softened. "Because qualifications aren't everything, Jamal. Trust, loyalty, and a genuine passion for what you do. That's what matters. When I was stranded on that road, you could have driven past me. You could have taken advantage of the situation. But you didn't. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Jamal looked away, his thoughts racing. On one hand, this was a dream opportunity. He'd always wanted to work on classic cars, to have the freedom to create something meaningful. On the other hand, it felt like stepping into an entirely new world, one where he wasn't sure he belonged. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice hesitant. "This is a lot." "I understand," Olivia said gently. "Take your time. Think about it. There's no pressure, and whatever you decide, the check and the truck are yours. Consider them a thank you for what you did." Jamal glanced at the folder and the keys again, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was a crossroads, and he could feel it. Whatever choice he made now would shape the rest of his life. Before he could say anything else, a knock on the door interrupted them. Olivia glanced over her shoulder as one of her staff entered the room, carrying a tray with tea and small sandwiches. "Why don't we have some tea?" Olivia suggested, her tone light and casual. "It might help to talk things through." Jamal nodded reluctantly, still unsure of what to say. As the tea was poured and the room filled with the comforting aroma of Earl Grey, he couldn't help but wonder how his life had taken such an unexpected turn. He had always thought of himself as an ordinary man, someone who fixed cars and got through life one day at a time. But now, as he sat in a mansion discussing job offers and life-changing opportunities, he realized that maybe, just maybe, life had bigger plans for him than he'd ever imagined. And the real journey was just beginning. Dreams and dilemmas. Jamal Carter spent the next few days in a state of restless contemplation. Olivia Harcourt's offer weighed heavily on his mind. The $250,000 check and brand-new truck were already surreal gifts. But the job, a chance to work on a collection of classic cars, to restore pieces of history, was the part that tugged most at his heart. It was everything he'd dreamed of, yet it felt too big, too far removed from the life he had built in Ridgely. Sitting in the garage late one evening, Jamal tinkered absent-mindedly with the engine of an old sit-in. The familiar smell of grease and the rhythmic clink of tools against metal usually brought him peace, but tonight his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept replaying Olivia's words in his mind. Trust, loyalty, and a genuine passion for what you do. That's what matters. He sighed, setting his wrench down and leaning against the workbench. On the wall in front of him was a faded picture of his late father standing proudly next to an old muscle car they'd rebuilt together. His father had been the one to ignite Jamal's love for mechanics, teaching him not just how to fix things, but to take pride in the work. "You'd probably tell me to go for it, wouldn't you?" Jamal muttered to the photo. "But what if it's too much?" His phone buzzed on the workbench, breaking his reverie. It was Calvin, his nosy but well-meaning neighbor. "Hey, Jamal." Calvin's voice came through, brimming with curiosity. "Did you decide yet? About that fancy job?" Jamal chuckled softly. "Not yet. Still thinking about it." "Man, what's there to think about? A truck, a fat check, and a dream job. Sounds like a no-brainer to me." "It's not that simple," Jamal replied. "Leaving the garage, the people here, it's a big change." Calvin was quiet for a moment before responding. "Look, I get it. But don't let fear hold you back, man. You've been talking about owning your own garage for years. Maybe this is how you get there." Jamal thanked him and hung up, feeling both reassured and unsettled. Calvin was right. This could be the stepping stone he needed. But what if he failed? What if he wasn't ready for a world that seemed so far out of reach? The next morning, Jamal decided he needed clarity. He drove his old truck, not the new one Olivia had gifted him, which still felt too extravagant, to a quiet spot by Ridgely Lake. The water was still, reflecting the morning sun like a sheet of glass. This was where he always came to think, away from the noise of the town and the hum of engines. As he sat on the tailgate of his truck, Jamal pulled out a notebook. It was old and battered, its pages filled with sketches of cars, notes on engine designs, and lists of ideas for his dream garage. He flipped through it, stopping at a page where he had scrawled, in bold letters, "Carter's Custom Garage." He smiled wistfully. It had been his dream for as long as he could remember. A place where he could work on classic cars, teach younger mechanics, and build something that truly felt his own. But dreams cost money, and for years, Jamal had been stuck in the cycle of barely making ends meet. With a deep breath, he pulled out the check Olivia had given him. The sight of the number still made his heart race. This was enough to start the garage, to finally turn his dream into reality. But the job at Olivia's estate offered something different: stability, a chance to hone his craft on rare vehicles, and a connection to a world he'd only ever seen from afar. Later that afternoon, Jamal made his way to Olivia's estate. He had called Mr. Whittaker earlier to arrange the visit, still unsure of what he was going to say. As he pulled into the driveway, the mansion loomed before him, just as imposing and surreal as the first time he had seen it. Mr. Whittaker greeted him at the door and led him through the familiar hallways. This time, Olivia was waiting for him in a large garage at the back of the estate. The space was vast, its walls lined with tools and parts, and in the center were several classic cars in varying states of disrepair. It was a mechanic's paradise, and Jamal couldn't help but let out a low whistle. "This is the collection," Olivia said, her voice tinged with pride. "Most of these cars belonged to my father. He loved restoring them. But after he passed, they've just been sitting here, waiting for someone who could bring them back to life." Jamal stepped closer to one of the cars, a 1967 Shelby GT 500. Its once pristine body was covered in dust, but he could see the potential beneath the grime. His hands itched to get to work, to bring it back to its former glory. "These aren't just cars," Olivia continued, watching him closely. "They're history. Each one has a story, and I want someone who understands that to take care of them." Jamal turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "It's an incredible opportunity. But I have to be honest, Olivia. I'm not used to all this. The mansion, the luxury. It's not who I am." Olivia smiled warmly. "That's exactly why I chose you, Jamal. I don't need someone who's used to this world. I need someone who's real, someone who works with their hands and their heart. And if this isn't what you want, that's okay. But I see potential in you, potential to do something amazing." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time, Jamal allowed himself to truly consider it. He looked around the garage again, imagining what it would be like to work here, to restore these cars, to make a mark on something that mattered. "I'll need some time to think," he said finally, his voice steady. "Of course," Olivia replied, her smile never faltering. "Take all the time you need. Just know that whatever you decide, you've already made an impact on me and on what I believe people are capable of." Jamal left the estate feeling lighter, though the decision still loomed over him. As he drove back to Ridgely, the possibilities unfolded in his mind. He wasn't just choosing between two paths. He was choosing the kind of life he wanted to lead. Would he take the leap into the unknown, or stay grounded in the life he'd always known? Either way, Jamal knew this was the moment that would define his future, and for the first time in years, he felt ready to face it. A leap of faith. The days that followed Jamal's visit to Olivia Harcourt's estate were a blur of indecision. Each time he thought he had made up his mind, doubt crept in, whispering questions he couldn't ignore. Could he adapt to such a different world? Would he be able to live up to Olivia's expectations? Was he prepared to leave the life he had built behind? Jamal found himself back at his garage late one evening, the space quiet except for the faint hum of the overhead lights. He stood in front of a 1980s Chevy pickup, its engine bay open and tools scattered across the workbench. This was his comfort zone, where grease-stained hands and the hum of an engine told stories that words couldn't. Yet, as he stared at the truck, he couldn't shake the image of Olivia's garage. The gleaming classic cars waiting to be restored, the tools and resources that would allow him to work without constraints. It was a mechanic's dream, but it also felt like stepping into a world that didn't belong to him. The sound of footsteps startled him. Turning, he saw his boss, Carl, standing in the doorway. Carl was an older man with a wiry frame and a face weathered by years of hard work. He had taken Jamal under his wing when he was just a teenager, teaching him everything he knew about cars and life. "Burning the midnight oil again," Carl said, his voice tinged with amusement. "Something like that," Jamal replied, forcing a smile. Carl stepped inside, his gaze falling on the truck. "You've been staring at that engine for an hour, And I don't think it's about the truck. What's on your mind, Hid? Jamal hesitated, then sighed. I got this offer. A big one. Someone wants me to manage their collection of classic cars, restore them, and keep them running. Carl raised an eyebrow. Sounds like a dream job. Why do you look like it's the end of the world? Because it feels too big, Jamal admitted. It's not just the job. It's the whole lifestyle. It's so far removed from what I know, from who I am. I don't know if I'm ready for that. Carl nodded thoughtfully, crossing his arms. Let me ask you something. When you were a kid, did you think you'd be where you are now? Jamal frowned. Not really. I didn't think I'd even make it this far. Exactly, Carl said. You didn't think you were ready back then, but you figured it out. That's what we do. We adapt, we grow. If you stay in your comfort zone your whole life, you'll never know what you're capable of. Jamal looked away, his thoughts swirling. Carl was right, but the fear of the unknown still loomed large. Carl placed a hand on his shoulder. You've got talent, Jamal. Real talent. And if someone's willing to give you the chance to use it on a bigger stage, you owe it to yourself to at least try. Don't let fear make your decisions for you. The next morning, Jamal made his decision. With a deep breath, he called Mr. Whittaker and accepted the job. The relief that followed was immediate, but so was the weight of the commitment. He knew this wasn't just a career change. It was a life change. 2 days later, Jamal stood in front of Olivia's estate once more, this time with a small suitcase in hand. The sight of the sprawling mansion still made his heart race, but now it was tempered by a sense of purpose. This was his new beginning, and he was ready to embrace it. Olivia met him at the entrance, her smile warm and welcoming. Welcome back, Jamal. I'm so glad you decided to join us. Thank you for giving me the chance, Jamal replied, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. She gestured for him to follow, leading him back to the garage. This time, Olivia handed him a clipboard with an inventory list. I thought we'd start by going through the collection together. You can get a sense of what we have and decide where you want to start. Jamal nodded, already feeling more at ease. As they walked through the rows of classic cars, Olivia shared stories about each one, how her father had acquired them, the history behind their designs, and the memories they held for her family. Jamal listened intently, his appreciation for the collection growing with every word. They stopped in front of a 1930s Packard, its elegant lines and tarnished chrome exuding a timeless beauty. Olivia placed a hand on the car's hood, her expression soft. This was my father's favorite. He used to take it out on Sunday drives when I was a little girl. It hasn't run in years, but I'd love to see it back on the road. Jamal stepped closer, his fingers tracing the edge of the car's fender. I can do that, he said with quiet confidence. It might take some time, but I'll get it running again. Olivia smiled, her eyes glinting with excitement. I know you will. Over the next few weeks, Jamal threw himself into his work. The estate's garage became his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the art of restoration. He rebuilt engines, repaired transmissions, and painstakingly polished faded paint to a gleaming shine. The Packard was his first major project, and every bolt he tightened and wire he connected felt like a step toward fulfilling his purpose. The job wasn't without its challenges. The estate's staff, though polite, initially regarded him with skepticism. Jamal wasn't from their world, and his straightforward, no-nonsense demeanor stood in stark contrast to the polished professionalism they were used to. But as they watched him work, their attitudes began to shift. They saw the care he put into every detail, the pride he took in his craft, and the quiet determination that drove him forward. One evening, as Jamal was finishing up for the day, Olivia stopped by the garage. She leaned against the doorframe, watching him with an expression of quiet admiration. You've done more in a few weeks than I ever thought possible, she said. Jamal wiped his hands on a rag, turning to face her. It's what I love to do. Thank you for giving me the chance. It's not just the cars. Olivia said, stepping closer. You've brought life back to this place. My father's collection was his passion, and seeing it cared for again, it means more to me than I can say. Jamal felt a warmth in her words that went beyond gratitude. For the first time, he realized that this job wasn't just about cars. It was about trust, legacy, and building something meaningful. As Olivia turned to leave, she paused in the doorway. You know, Jamal, I think you were right about one thing. What's that? He asked. This isn't just a job. It's something bigger. For both of us. Jamal nodded, his heart swelling with a mix of pride and determination. He didn't know exactly where this journey would lead, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. Building the future. 3 months had passed since Jamal Carter took the leap of faith that brought him into Olivia Harcourt's world. The sprawling estate, once a symbol of luxury and excess he had struggled to comprehend, now felt like a place of purpose. The garage, stocked with gleaming tools and cars that carried decades of history, had become his second home. On this particular morning, the estate buzzed with unusual energy. A crew of photographers and journalists had arrived to document the unveiling of the first fully restored car in Olivia's late father's collection, the 1930s Packard. Jamal stood in the garage, wiping a speck of dust from the car's polished hood, his reflection clear in its deep black finish. Every curve, every bolt, every stitch in the upholstery bore his careful touch. You've outdone yourself, Olivia said as she entered, her heels clicking softly on the polished concrete floor. Jamal turned, a small smile breaking across his face. She deserves it. Your father's favorite car. It had to be perfect. Olivia stepped closer, her eyes scanning the car with admiration. It's more than perfect, Jamal. You've brought it back to life. My father would be proud. Jamal nodded, the words filling him with a quiet sense of accomplishment. He had doubted himself when he first started, unsure if he could meet Olivia's expectations or adapt to this new world. But with each project, his confidence grew. This wasn't just about fixing cars. It was about preserving a legacy, something he now felt deeply connected to. Later that day, the event began. Guests, dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses, gathered on the estate's sprawling lawns. The Packard sat at the center of attention, its gleaming body and meticulously restored details drawing murmurs of admiration from the crowd. Jamal stood off to the side, trying to stay out of the spotlight. This wasn't his scene, but he couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as people marveled at his work. As Olivia gave a speech about her father's passion for cars and the significance of the restoration project, she paused and looked directly at Jamal. None of this would have been possible without one person, she said, her voice warm and steady. Jamal Carter is not only a talented mechanic, but someone who brings heart and integrity to everything he does. This project is just the beginning, and I'm so grateful to have him leading it. A round of applause erupted, and Jamal felt his face flush. He nodded politely, his hands tucked into his pockets, wishing he could disappear into the garage. But as the clapping subsided, Olivia approached him, her smile reassuring. You deserve this, she said quietly. Don't hide from it. Jamal shrugged, a small grin breaking through. I'm more comfortable behind a wrench than in front of a crowd. That's what makes you different, Olivia replied. And why I trust you with all of this. As the guests mingled and the sun dipped low on the horizon, Jamal found himself alone near the Packard. He ran his hand along the car's fender, thinking about how far he'd come. The doubts that had plagued him in the beginning now felt distant, replaced by a sense of the longing he hadn't felt in years. Lost in thought, Olivia's voice broke through, and Jamal turned to see her standing nearby, a glass of champagne in hand. Just thinking about how much has changed, he admitted. He gestured around them. None of it feels real sometimes. Olivia stepped closer, her gaze steady. That's because you've earned it, Jamal. You didn't take the easy road. You stepped into something unfamiliar and made it your own. That's not something everyone can do. Jamal studied her for a moment. I almost didn't. I thought about walking away. But you didn't, Olivia said firmly. And look at what you've accomplished. This isn't just about restoring cars. It's about building something meaningful. For you, for my father's legacy, for everyone who sees what's possible when passion meets hard work. Jamal nodded, her words resonating deeply. I guess I owe you for believing in me. Olivia smiled. We both took a chance on each other, Jamal. And I think it's paying off. In the weeks that followed, Jamal settled further into his role, expanding his vision for the garage and the collection. With Olivia's support, he began hiring a small team of young mechanics, many from underprivileged backgrounds, who shared his passion for classic cars. Teaching them, watching their skills grow, and seeing their pride in the work became one of the most rewarding parts of his journey. One afternoon, as he walked through the garage, he spotted one of the new hires, a teenage boy named Marcus, struggling with a particularly stubborn carburetor. Jamal crouched beside him, offering guidance and encouragement until the engine roared to life. Marcus beamed, and Jamal felt a familiar sense of pride. He was building something far greater than a restored car. Months turned into a year, and Jamal's reputation grew. Word of the restorations spread, drawing interest from collectors, enthusiasts, and even local schools eager to learn from the master mechanic. Carter's Custom Garage, a name Olivia had insisted on using for the project, became a symbol of craftsmanship and integrity. One evening, as Jamal stood outside the garage watching the sunset, Olivia joined him. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before she spoke. You know, Jamal, I think my father would have liked you, she said softly. He believed in hard work and honesty, just like you do. Jamal smiled, his gaze fixed on the horizon. That means a lot. This place, it's become more than I ever imagined. And it's all because you gave me a chance. Olivia shook her head. You earned this, Jamal, and I can't wait to see where you take it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate in a golden glow, Jamal felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had taken a risk, faced his fears, and stepped into a world he once thought was beyond his reach. Now, he wasn't just restoring cars, he was restoring lives, his own included. And for the first time, he truly believed that the best was yet to come.